Hi there, I'm Dave Levine. I'm the host of the Sports Stories podcast, and I'm delighted to have you with me for episode 43. Now, before we get into the details of today's show, I'd just like to put out a massive thank you to both my previous guests, you the listener, and all those people that are involved in producing the podcast. This is a special time of year as it's our first anniversary, and the feedback over the last couple of weeks or so has been absolutely amazing and making it all the more worthwhile to keep the podcast going, providing you, the listeners, and the guests opportunity to share their story and learn from them. Now, today is a really special time, given that I've got a guest I don't know very well, never met before, but I feel like I've got a connection with him. Sam Parfitt is my guest, and he's the CEO and founder of the True Athlete Project. Sam previously was a performance tennis player as well, and has played tennis both in the US and in England and around the world. Sam is a really special bloke in terms of the work that he's doing in really moving forward the development of athletes, both at grassroots and performance level, through the True Athlete Project. Now, without me giving too much away, Sam has a real special approach, and he's connected in with the Muhammad Ali Centre in the US, and is really on a journey to make a difference through sport. And why that really resonates with me is that it's properly aligned to the work that we're doing through Sports Stories and wanting to make a difference, albeit small or large, through sport to the communities around the world. So without further ado, I'll just ask you to sit back, enjoy, listen to the podcast in the best way you can. I'm pretty sure Sam will give away some real great gems and insights and provide inspiration for you to make a real difference to your life and those around you through the vehicle of sport, whether you're in sport, whether you're leaving sport, or you just like using the principles of it. So all it leaves me to do is wish a very, very warm welcome to my very special guest, CEO and founder of the True Athlete Project, Mr. Sam Parfitt. Well, Sam, welcome to the Sports Stories podcast. Thanks ever so much for giving up the time and joining me here today. I'm really looking forward to talking to you. You know, I'm conscious of some of the work you do as the CEO and founder of the True Athlete Project, but I'm really keen to find out a little bit more at some stage, and I'm sure we'll get to that. Before we go there, though, you know, it'd be great just to hear a little bit about, you introducing yourself to the listeners, but also how did you first get involved in sport?
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Dave. So, I was from Norfolk originally, and my dad was my tennis coach. So, grew up with a sort of racket in my hand from very early on, and would be hitting balls against the wall late at night and through the day, and annoying the neighbours. And so that was really my sort of first introduction into sport. And remember being completely hooked from an early age. Would come down early and watch Transworld Sport in the mornings, and so just loved everything about the idea of being an athlete, the idea of growing through sport, and actually quite quickly I sort of had these ideas about kind of where it could take me, and actually the difference that I might be able to make through sport. I was really, really inspired by that feeling of, for want of a maybe less spiritual term, sort of transcendence through sport, that liberating, joyful, freeing sort of escape when you're just completely in the moment. And I would remember, so my dad would come and visit on a Sunday, and we'd play tennis in the evening, kind of growing up. And I remember that feeling of, there'd be about 10 or 15 minutes left at the end of the session, and sort of suddenly, like, Sunday evening sort of dinner, and then Monday school was around the corner, and that, like, it was sort of like someone throwing cold water on you, this sort of sudden shock of realizing that you were completely gone in that moment of playing tennis for me. So yeah, I think that's where it all started.
And what sort of age was that then, Sam? You know, how old were you? What can you remember back to?
So I can remember hitting tennis balls against the wall really young, sort of first few years of primary school. I remember it was the Corda Rios Australian Open final, so that was like 97 or 98 maybe. So I was 7 or 8 years old. So every Australian Open, I would want to get up at about 2 a.m. to watch the final. That was when the final was played, at about 2 a.m. UK time. And I wouldn't set an alarm, but I'd make myself be able to wake up. And I was able to wake up exactly the right time, and I would go downstairs, and it was kind of my yearly tradition. So that was, I was pretty hooked by 7 or 8 for sure, but played competitions, sort of started competitions quite late compared to a lot of people, more like 12 or 13 really. So it's in some ways was a bit of a a late developer, had to do a bit of catching up. There were lots of sort of county and regional and national squads kind of happening before I was at that point, and actually really sort of enjoyed that chase, and really proving to myself and others that I could be persistent and maximize my talent, I guess.
And was it just tennis from day dot, or were other things around that?
Really liked football as a kid. Liked playing snooker and pool, usually because you're at a tennis, in a clubhouse or something during a tournament. At school, I really liked athletics and really enjoyed triple jump particularly, and loved watching Jonathan Edwards, and would have, I think if I'd have had a sort of redo, I would have tried to take triple jump a little bit further. Rowing and triple jump were the two that I've never really, got into in any serious way, and but would have loved to. Wow.
Tell me a little bit more about your kind of family setup then, and your background. You say, obviously your dad was your coach. How did he impact on you, and what sort of role did he play as a coach?
I think those sessions were just so sort of special, really. I think fundamentally it was just so much fun to realize that you can kind of work the ball around the court and sort of jockey with, tease the opponent, sort of thing. And I remember being probably quite young, and he would hit a kick serve, a topspin sort of second serve, and I remember this sort of enormously difficult thing sort of flying over my head with all this movement and speed, and sort of basically being knocked over. And sort of now obviously it would be like sort of at my knee height, you could just stroll in and knock it away. But I remember that sort of idea of just, oh my God, that's such a cool thing to be able to do, that sort of mind-body connection of deciding you want to do something and then making it happen and feeling that unleashing. So I think there was something quite pure about it. But my dad was also really, really into the sort of more mental, emotional, more holistic side of sport. So he would often come out with sort of Zen proverbs in the middle of teaching me something new on the serve, or ideas around. I remember a really powerful one was I was working on sort of short put away forehands. So you've got a lot of time on the ball, and it's quite easy to rush, and it's quite easy to get a little tight on that, and for the arm to kind of tense up and slow down. And so the idea we used was to imagine time slowing down. And from just immediately, the very first time I tried it, it worked. And it was literally like time was slowing down. Like I was seeing everything so clearly, so slowly, and then able to put away these forehand putaways is what we would call them, but sort of short, high forehands. And so that just things like that just started to pique my interest of, okay, there's more to being human, and there's more to being an athlete than you might get from a typical like 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. school education, where everything I think I felt pretty locked in school generally. I was looking back at some old like class books and things, and I think I must have been a nightmare for teachers, really. I think I had a lot of like pent up frustration. Yeah, so I guess sport was a natural remedy for that too.
Gosh, and it just sounds like this was more than tennis though, wasn't it, as well? This is about you exploring and growing and developing, and that concept of making time stand still. How do you do that? How did that kind of come to light? Because I just think that's such a fascinating concept to bring in alongside sport.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, I think it was literally like my dad said, "Give it a go," and I gave it a go, and it worked. So I wasn't particularly skillful about it, probably initially. I think it was very much being creative and using your imagination. We did a lot around kind of visualization and using imagery and pretend targets, like to get a lob in a perfect place, imagining a hot air balloon way above your opponent and that kind of stuff. So I guess a lot of it was sort of trial and error, and realizing that stuff works is nice, because then there's sort of positive feedback loop, which then helps you to be even more open to creative ideas. So a lot of so my dad was very much into sort of ignoring necessarily the sort of boundaries of the court. And I think I've passed that on in my coaching, and it really worked. I was coaching with Max Rolander a couple of years ago, and he did exactly the same thing. So that sort of gave me a little pep in my steps, like, okay, that's probably the way to go.
Yeah,
so
I'm on the right track here.
Yeah, so turning to the side netting and practicing really kind of over exaggerating movements, and not just being confined by needing to make every shot and be consistent and be a sort of a little precise machine early on. Just a much more kind of creative, explorative way of sort of doing things.
And Sam, I appreciate, we're interested in your journey, but I'm also curious here about, was your dad a coach? Was that his kind of occupation and his career, or was he something else that led in? Because I'm curious, how do parents bring in to their kind of into their life, and how does that pass on to their children as such? And I'm just curious as to the role he played and where it came from.
Yeah, interesting. So he was a tennis player, really high level tennis player, and then became a coach, and very much, I think a big part of what so inspires me by him is not getting sucked into the sort of political stuff in the sport that so many people do. And now that I'm sort of with the True Athlete Project, moving in sort of these elite sport circles and across lots and lots of different sports, it's so plain to see just how kind of politicized a lot of it is. And he's always been so grounded in the process of helping someone enjoy, improve at, and therefore enjoy and therefore improve at their sport and what that brings to someone. And so I think that was a big bit of it. So I think, yeah, his lack of needing to get any kind of sort of personal ego kick out of being a certain, I don't know, recognized in a certain way or whatever. I think that's been quite powerful for me.
Yeah, and really passed on to you, it sounds, in terms of actually your philosophy. Now, I'm here to help people get better, not to get involved in all the stuff around that.
Yeah, exactly. And to really do it for themselves and out of hopefully quite sort of pure reasons. There's a lot that can get in the way, I think, of sport being something that is impactful, either for an individual or at the level of sort of culture and society. So although a lot of people talk about this power of sport, this inherent power of sport and the universal language of sport and what it can do, and that's true, but it's not true if if things get in the way, and if there are sort of forces that can counteract that and give people a really harmful experience that actually has really harmful knock-on effects to culture and society. And that happens so often, unfortunately.
Yeah, it could be impactful positively or negatively because of the power of sport. Yeah, exactly. You mentioned there about the Zen proverbs, and I'm just thinking, wow, that's kind of an interesting concept which often doesn't sit alongside sport in many people's worlds. And I'm just curious as to, when did you really start acknowledging that sort of impact from your father? What sort of age were you at, and how did that sort of really start becoming part of you and your journey?
Yeah, because it was quite sort of felt, and I was receiving what he was giving for at a sort of early age. So I moved to London to play full-time tennis at 15, 16, then to the States at 18 to play Division 1 college tennis. And in those 4 years in the States competing, I had all sorts of surgeries. So it was a real roller coaster, basically in and out of hospital the entire sort of 4 years. And so it's a physical roller coaster, but also a mental, emotional roller coaster. And so I left sport really feeling this sort of paradox of the joy of sport on the one hand, and then the really harmful kind of destructive bit on the other hand. And so fortunately, I had quite a lot of opportunities to sort of explore sport, not from a selfish sort of competitive point of view, but really kind of exploring it in different settings. So I did a lot of work with at-risk Hispanic immigrant children with soccer and inclusive sport. My first job out of college was as a head of sport at a school. My academic work started focusing on sport and the construction of national identity. I just at the same time, kind of having all those surgeries, was introduced to a mindfulness teacher called Young, and his teacher actually as well, Kitasaro, in Chattanooga in Tennessee. And at the same time, I was kind of seeing a sports psychologist. And so all these themes started to converge a little bit for me. But that was really the first sort of formal opening to mindfulness meditation. And I felt the effects for me very, very quickly. And although I wasn't really competing anymore, I was still kind of hitting and coaching, and could immediately see how helpful the practices that were so helpful for my well-being could also be so helpful for performance. So I think that's where it really sort of started. And then I got this job as a head of sport at a school, and they really didn't have a PE program. So I had a sort of blank slate really to create something that really tried to shift perceptions of what it means to be an athlete at quite a young age, and design something from scratch. So we introduced things like parkour and mindfulness and sports poetry and studying sport for peace, introducing international sports like cricket, and studying heroes like Muhammad Ali. And it just worked so well. It was clearly kind of making a difference, and people liked it. And so I thought, oh, okay, hang on, there's something.
Did it just evolve then, Sam, this kind of thing? Did it just organically evolve? Or was there kind of a real, actually, we know this is going to work and we need to put it in place?
It was a bit of both. I enjoy kind of research anyway, and
Okay.
I was in touch with quite a lot of different academics and different disciplines, and so there was a little bit of both, and it sort of gradually built. But it was, in terms of then kind of layering on that evidence to what will work and what will be fun for kids in Tennessee, like that then was a pretty organic process of feeling things out and trying stuff, and bringing the school with me into this approach. They were very, very open and progressive, which was awesome. And then that curriculum got picked up by the Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville, Kentucky, and they invited me to come and present it. And that's really where I got a sense of how to sort of build that out into what is now the True Athlete Project.
Wow. And I want to definitely come to the work you're doing with the Muhammad Ali Center and the True Athlete Project. But I just to take you back into the kind of the highs and the lows that you went through. You talked about all of the, being operated on a lot and a lot of surgery and the lows there, and actually so many changes. Could you talk us through a real specific example of a really tough time that you had in that, and how did you manage yourself out of it? Because I'm just conscious of, a lot of the listeners, we all go on highs and lows, but often can take little tips or hints out of, not to copy you, but actually they might think of the sense of, actually, this is how somebody might have managed themselves out of it.
Yeah, there were so many difficult moments in that period. As you asked the question, the one that comes to mind for whatever reason, and I've started being a little better about just trusting the gut and what emerges, was I was walking back from A&E. It was a really pretty grotty A&E, and it was like, I don't know, it was dark. It was sort of 5 or 6 a.m. or something, and I'd been through the night kind of there on my own and had whatever they were trying to do to my throat, trying to lance an abscess and different things. And just, I remember, I don't know, whatever it was hadn't worked. And I remember walking back, I remember the street and I could sort of just about make out where the tennis courts were. And it was so painful. I sort of went down into my knees and was just like holding my face. And it was just excruciating, sort of holding my face and throat, and just very sort of lost feeling, I guess. But there were quite a few moments that were like that in those 4 years. But then there were also just these incredibly kind of uplifting moments, and I wouldn't change anything really. The 4 years were filled with meeting amazing people and trying new things, and I think that's probably the I guess the takeaway for me was being quite open in my communication to people I was meeting was helpful. So I was able to make relationships quite well, build relationships quite well. And that was helpful because I then had a sort of support network really that built over my time there. Because that memory I just had was sort of quite early on, probably in the first semester of the 4 years. So I think that was quite key. I used to make a pretty conscious effort to be open. I remember if I was struggling in a class, I would go to a professor and try to build a relationship so that I cared what they thought about me, so that then I'd have so I had more motivation to actually try hard in their class if I felt like they cared about me.
No, but I really like that kind of idea that that there was a conscious strategy there, because I guess for me throughout our careers and our lives, what's conscious and what's not conscious in terms of the way we behave, and I guess during our teenage years and so on, lots of it is just evolving and we're working things out. But it sounds like it was beginning to become much more conscious in terms of, wow, I'm out here in a country, I'm pretty much on my own. It's quite a lonely place. At times I'm feeling lost. I've got to find some strategies to help me here, and does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. And there's probably, I would probably have been helped at that time by being a little more intentional, a little creating some more conscious strategies. I did notice a shift tennis was absolutely everything I cared about and loved and wanted to do. And I did certainly notice a shift in my feelings towards it while I was training out there. And there was a lot of it was very serious, very heavy sort of culture of sport there. And I definitely remember a sense of sort of realizing, oh wait, hang on, this is not quite right, and I can be involved in, if I want to go to a psychology of religion class or something else, and that means that I'm not hanging out with the team, like sort of giving myself permission to do that and be fine with that, and not need to kind of stick to just the expectations that I guess I was kind of felt the pressure to lean into. So that was a bit of a shift. I think that can come across as maybe a bit individualistic, and I guess I'm a tennis player, so that would make sense. but
it also sounds for me as in maybe individualistic, but also something there about not needing to follow the crowd. And it might be the same thing here, but I guess there's something about, I was thinking that actually being solely focused on the tennis world might be quite narrowing, actually. And yet you had the comfort to be able to challenge the system and actually break the mold a little bit and broaden. And, that's also quite an interesting tension.
Yeah, it was. I remember being concerned, I guess, about what teammates would think. But I also knew, like when we would play teams. So when you're a tennis player in the UK growing up, you are basically just an individual. There's not really team stuff. There's not a lot of high school sport that you'd be involved with really if you were sort of taking it a bit more seriously. But then in the States, even individual sport athletes are pretty used to being part of teams. There's team tennis, and high school sport's quite a big thing, and then they're always thinking ahead to college sport. And so I found that a really hard shift, suddenly doing a team warm-up where you had to start with lunges. Like, I've never started with lunges. Why should I start with
and with the team?
Yeah, and with the team and their rhythm. And so I found that pretty difficult. And I remember one match sort of looking at a teammate who I didn't really get along with playing his match. And I remember knowing the guy he was playing and just thinking to myself, I really wanted the other guy to win. Like at any sort of moral level, the right thing was for the other person to win. And I remember sort of, reflecting on that, like, hang on a minute, that's not quite right, but that's what it was.
So Sam, how did you find that kind of transition? Just sticking with that point a little bit, because again, I think the idea of sport being an individual sport, again, we've had previous guests on who've been in the cricket world who are kind of parallel a little bit, cricket being an individual sport, but also a team sport. And I know it's not exactly the same, or swimmers, they're individual sport, but they're also part of a team. And I'm just wondering, how did you manage that tension, given that I'm guessing you think yourself as an individual person, or you were brought up initially like that?
Yeah, it was really. It's been something that I've had to really learn, especially kind of stepping through into the world of work and being involved in all sorts of different projects that are naturally about teams as opposed to you as an individual. I've had to really work hard on making that adjustment and knowing when to allow other people the space to flourish versus when I'm useful in the conversation to contribute. And it's definitely been something that I think I still probably continue to work on.
Well, and on that vein, I guess, is the transition between the sport career that you had as a tennis player through to, as you transitioned into different projects and into work. What were some of the highlights, or what some of the kind of key strengths that you feel you really learnt in tennis, which you are working with now that you're transitioning across and calling on?
Yeah. So I think trying new things. So if you want to get better at your sport, you've got to innovate and experiment and not worry about the result immediately. So you might change something technically in your backhand, and for 6 weeks it's not going to be very good, and then eventually it'll be much better than it was originally. So I think that attitude of not really worrying if there's a bad day, because it's all part of a bigger process, that's something that is quite sustaining for me, I think, and quite exciting, keeps it quite fresh. Persistence for sure. So I work quite long hours, but really, really enjoy it. So again, it's sort of quite a sustaining thing to be working on a project where you feel like you're having an impact. And so I think just like dogged determination is one bit that I've been able to kind of carry across. The idea of being a CEO athlete is something I'm giving workshops on at the moment, but basically sort of the idea of creating a team around you and leveraging resources, I think is something which I've learned to do. I mean, all of these things I wish I'd have learned at like 14 instead of 24 and practice them now at 30. So yeah, it would have been nice. But those are the things, probably the key things that are coming up.
There's the real parallel in terms of, actually, for me, something about, I'm calling on the experiences that I wish I had, and now I'm offering them back into the system. So I can see the kind of the using your own journey as a real catalyst here, and a resource to the work that you're doing. And is that quite intentional, do you think? Is that what's driving you in the work you're doing?
Yeah, I think so. So I found a letter from, which I never sent, to my high school head teacher. I had written it when I was about 14 or 15, I think about 14. And it was thanking him for letting me come out of school early to go to a Norfolk tennis session. And he actually unfortunately passed away, which means you won't get that letter. But I found this letter, and it was all about, I didn't even realize that that's where my mind was until I found the letter, but it was all about imagining how sort of good I can become in the sport in order to have a platform. And I was mentioning Andre Agassi's foundation, and how cool it would be if I could have something like that eventually by becoming great at the sport and having a platform to make a difference. So it was quite young where I was thinking a little bit in that way. Agassi was my idol, so my first word before mum or dad apparently was Agassi. Wow. So yeah, I was sort of thinking in that way, and then had this really negative experience in London kind of before going to Tennessee. Had really poor mental health particularly, and I'd written a little book called Underground Hero, and it was all about how you can sort of use the ordinary opportunity to make a difference to the world and to others. So it was all about traveling on the London Underground, and you would have, it was a little bit sort of gimmicky, I guess, but there was a real message underneath it. You would collect points on your sort of journey to become this ultimate underground hero, and it was a mixture of sort of physical challenges like standing on one leg while the tube comes to a stop, and mental challenges and emotional challenges, and smiling at the person next to you, or whatever it was. So again, that was sort of, I think, some of the early themes of me just becoming quite conscious of how dissatisfied I was with how some things were in the world, and wanting to try to do something practical and tangible that would help people and that would make a difference. And I guess through those later experiences through college and things, that, and then being introduced to mindfulness more seriously, and developing a practice and going on retreats, and the whole thing built up until the point of being able to create the True Athlete Project, which is a very intentional way of helping sport to unleash its power and its positive potential in society.
You know what, Simon, and as you're talking, the word, three sort of phrases that you used there really jumped out to me, and they were kind of making a difference in the world, those kind of ideas. There's something for me around entrepreneurism as well. The fact that you've set up and generated a business, and there's not just making a difference in the world, but actually there's things that are not quite right, and you've recognized that. And I'm just curious as to know, when did you realize that this was really in you, and that you had it, whether it was a plan? You used the word, it's intentional, but was this early days? Did you always know from an early age that you would probably want to, you mentioned about setting up the foundation, and I'm just thinking, again, hearing your journey, how do individuals listening in here think about actually, there's something quite purposeful about what you're doing and how you're doing it? And I know a lot of people at the minute are trying to work out their direction and what they do and who are they. And I'm just wondering how yours has panned out, and what steps did you then take?
Yeah, I think I've always been sensitive probably generally as a person, but sensitive to what's wrong in the world and where things can be made better, like not accepting the status quo and not accepting this sort of treadmill that we're often all on. It can be really hard with all the sort of pressures of life and how things are sort of socially constructed, really hard to just break free from that and realize just how special and sacred really the everyday moment is, the ordinary moment is, and helping people to get the most from that. I guess slightly born out of my sense that we have one existence and we're incredibly lucky to be living. I think that's probably the foundation of it. I remember again in London, I designed this charity that was going to help people with multiple sclerosis. My mum had MS, and I remember having this little notepad and going around doing market research, which wasn't really market research. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was trying. I was trying to do something. I designed this logo and was walking around people's houses, and they probably thought, "What on earth is this kid doing?" But so I guess, it was in there, and then being. I think it was just seeing so much. I mean, if you're tuning into that, how people are sort of locked into sort of typical ways of being, then you're seeing it all the time. That's quite difficult to see all the time if you are tuned into it, I think. And then sort of through my experiences in sport and seeing other people in sport, my sister's experience of high school sport, and elite sport stars in the media, and even the kids I was helping at sort of a youth grassroots sport level, seeing the harm that was getting in the way of something that could be really fantastic and freeing was just, I guess, quite overwhelming. I remember sitting at the Muhammad Ali Center, sort of seeing these different presentations of people who were in the sport for social change world, kind of making a difference, and having a really overwhelming feeling as I sat there, not able to sort of start planning immediately, and doing something about it, and then driving home from Louisville to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and just sort of bursting with ideas. And so maybe it just reached boiling point.
Yeah. God, amazing stuff. And you know what's really beginning to really drip through from every bit of your career and your story is that kind of determination and persistence, but in a, I don't know, in a kind of a very quiet, subtle way. I'm also really playing with the tension between, you know, this lovely idea, which I'm a little bit biased to this, but the idea of, you know, performance environments being very single-minded and individualistic, and, you know, we'll tread on anybody to get to where we want to be, but actually using some of the better elements of those qualities in social change and making a difference.
Yeah. Well, I take that first part as a huge compliment, the quiet bit of trying to make a difference. I think it's so important that we embody change first, as opposed to just using a megaphone and trying to force other people to make a difference. So that's where I see social change efforts being effective, is by being the change, for want of a less cliched phrase. But so I think, and that's why we use the butterfly as our logo as well for the True Athlete Project. So it's all about this kind of transformation of self first, in order to then make this impact out onto the world. And so I think that connects with your second point there around how the very same practices and training that can help you to be resilient and focused and bounce back from mistakes and self-compassionate and sort of nuanced and subtle, and how you focus your attention gently and in the right way, rather than just kind of gritting your teeth and pushing through. Like, all of that ability, they're the same things that can lead to, and that can help and support well-being, but they're also things that can help you be kind of outward looking and sensitive to people's backgrounds and context, and how their behavior or their words is emerging out of a sort of infinite antecedent. And so really trying to sort of appreciate our role in the world and how we impact others. I think those things are all so connected. So that's really why the True Athlete Project has these kind of three big strands: performance, well-being, and social change. And we don't think that those things need to be separate or add-ons or one and then the next. It's not linear. The whole thing is one.
So on the True Athlete Project there, Sam, you know, tell us a little bit more about what it is you're actually doing, because, you know, I've become closer to it over the last, you know, few months or so. I've begun to understand a little bit more, but I'm sure to some of the listeners it will be a relatively new project, or they've not heard of it. So quite practically, tell us a little bit more.
Thanks. Yeah. So I brought together this team, actually, sort of after this Muhammad Ali Centre forum I was involved with. Brought together a team that included the former UK Health Minister and the first woman to defeat men in canoeing national history in the States, and a guy who pioneered wheelchair Tai Chi, and mindfulness teachers, Olympians, Paralympians, to really think about, okay, so we've got this vision of the change we want to make. We see that performance, well-being, and social change are these things that we want to include as part and parcel of what it is to be an athlete. So what are the vehicles for that mission, practically speaking? Yeah. How are we going to do it? So we part of deciding those vehicles was this other sense of, actually, we want to be able to impact sport at all levels. So not just the most elite sport, but also grassroots sport, where perhaps there's the biggest sort of public and social health benefit. So we created a few different vehicles, a few different programs. So we have a global mentoring program. So that pairs elite, Olympians, Paralympians with young athletes, aspiring athletes. So the young athletes are 15 to 24, paired in this one-to-one nurturing year-long relationship. The mentor receives all sorts of sort of holistic training, and the pair go through 5 different themes for a year. So they touch on performance, identity and values, mindfulness, community responsibility, nature and connectedness. And they, of course, the mentees can bring up everything that's happening in their life as well. But they sort of dive into these different topics in a really holistic year that's designed to broaden and deepen who we are as athletes. So that's one program, and that now has 68 athletes across 33 sports in 10 countries. So that's growing. And we've actually created a couple of different mentoring programs off the back of that for at-risk youth, and actually kind of within teams as well. So we did one with British fencing that paired elite and junior fencers together. Normally it's across sport and across countries. We have coach development workshops, particularly helping coaches integrate things like mindfulness into their work and their lives. We run classes for athletes, like our 6-week In the Zone Mindfulness for Athletes class. We had a retreat in Costa Rica. Wow. So we're hoping that so that was a deeper dive into sort of physical, mental training. So we're hoping to run more of those in the future. And we work with national governing bodies to package up quite a few different things and really work in a very sort of bespoke, tailored way to what their needs are and their challenges are and what their objectives are, to help them embed this compassion-based, mindfulness-based approach to sport at a very practical sort of daily lived level. So that includes working with leadership, staff, coaches, volunteers, parents, athletes on the pathway, the most elite athletes. So they're really, we're working with 2 organizations at the moment, British Fencing and Basketball Scotland, and we're hoping to create 2 or 3 new partnerships with governing bodies in the months to come. So that's a really exciting step for us, because it's really kind of exploring how you do that at a more systemic level, rather than just at the level of the individual or the team. So and then we have some sort of special projects which maybe don't fit into those categories that I mentioned of mentoring and classes and workshops. And so because a lot of what we do has this sort of golden thread running through it in terms of the philosophy and the approach and mindfulness-based practices. So actually it's quite flexible to being able to adapt to different needs and different contexts. We work with a community sports center in quite an in-depth way, really trying to help their coaches to integrate well-being practices at the very kind of grounded level of delivering basketball. And
amazing stuff. And as you're talking through there, I'm kind of quite transfixed into hearing about the different projects and the impact that you're moving to try and make. And it also really brilliantly aligns to kind of the philosophy of the sports stories part, because again, sharing stories, swapping them across is truly underpinned with trying to provide education, inspiration and transformation kind of stuff as well. So it's just brilliantly aligned. I don't know if this is an unfair question, Sam, but we've talked about being the change and the impact you wanted to make really practically. Is there a vision? What would it look like in your hope, desire for I don't know, 5 years or so, 10 years even? Do you?
Yeah. So I sometimes struggle with this question, and I was wondering why. And then someone asked it recently, and I spoke quite sort of purely, and it made me realize what I'm thinking about it. So we are really confident in the difference we make when we work with athletes, coaches, children, young people. The feedback we get, what we see in the room, is because we're creating these kind of very deep, sort of profound, quite emotional sort of spaces where people can be vulnerable and share and be their true selves. That feedback is so sustaining. And so sometimes I put a lot of pressure on myself in terms of growth over 5 years and 10 years. And actually, I think what has been quite helpful over the last few weeks for me is just remembering that no matter how much we grow, we're making this positive impact at every stage. And that's really quite motivating. So we it sounds like a really primitive answer at a sort of business level, but we sort of just want to do more of what we're doing, and bring it to more people who need us, as opposed to, at a business sense, being able to bring it to those who need us most, who can't afford us, and can't maybe typically access that type of support. So being able to create, a social enterprise approach and bring in funding so that we can actually get to and really see who needs what we give most. I think that's really important. But so being able to do more of it, and to do more of it for the people who need us is, that might sound quite primitive, but I think that's really what is my idea of being able to remain quite process oriented as well as we grow. I've got a sort of vision in my head of, at a very micro level, of there's a bit in one of the Star Wars films where I think it's right at the end, where a kid sort of sees this. I think it's like I'll probably offend all Star Wars fans by just butchering it, but it picks up some sort of talisman with I don't know if it's the rebel sort of symbol on it or something, and sort of looks up to the galaxy, and it's like you're seeing hope in this little kid and inspiration. And so I sort of have the same vision of what the tap butterfly can mean for people, particularly children and young people in future. So if we could get to, that's pretty vague, but if we can get to and it might be something that we never even know, that ripple effect that goes out. I was speaking to a coach the other day who said, right at the end of like a 2-hour call, said, oh yeah, and we've got 2 or 3 of the kids you've been teaching mindfulness to have been running mindfulness sessions for their teammates and younger kids at the club. I was like, oh, cool. You just dropped that in right at the end of the conversation. Like, that's a pretty big deal. That's awesome.
Yeah, wow. It's really rippling out and we don't know about it, but
exactly.
Great to know. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
God, really powerful. And I think I also love the idea of, where you keep saying it sounds really primitive in a business sense, or is it just really simple? And we're just trying to keep it simple and organic, and I think there's something quite precious about actually keeping it not too planned and actually organic and going where the need is. And a very strong word that you probably didn't mention that was just resonated with me is kind of accessible as well, which really kind of struck through for what you were saying. And I guess on a parallel then, Sam, I just wondered if there's any difference in, bringing the focus back to you. Where do you see you?
Thanks. Yeah, I normally see me and tap as completely intertwined beings.
Okay.
So it's nice to be able to reflect on that separately. Yeah. So we are a charity in the States, and we're also a company, and we're currently applying for charitable status in the UK. My wife happens to be from the States as well. Okay. So in terms of life goals, being able to move and work freely between the 2 countries, and therefore be able to be with her family, be with my family, that is kind of a big enough goal for it to be one of the only things I think about in terms of future planning, to be honest, because it's not easy. So I suppose that'll be the thing that comes to mind. Yeah, and I think getting more and more involved in climate justice efforts is something that appeals, and that I'd like to work harder at. And that would be the second one, I think.
Wow. Two big areas there then.
Two pretty big areas.
Which is fabulous there. Meaningful areas. And again, what's really lovely for me hearing your story, and I hope again individuals listening and reflect on, is the pathway that you've gone from a real working as a determined and a passionate and a persevering kind of young professional sports person, right the way through to running your business and looking at the difference you can make in the world, but also how you've flipped it in some ways to recognizing all the impact that you had in the experiences and how you can then help others with it. And I just think it's a lovely hearing different stories as to, could you have ever sat down and written the journey? Well, I don't know that you could, would you? It's kind of it's been an organic fluid kind of journey by the sound of it.
Very fluid. Yeah. And I think we are really lucky in the True Athlete Project in that the people who sort of instinctively get what we're about are just these amazing individuals, not just amazing athletes, but incredible human beings. And so we have developed and sort of built this team who, helping our sort of core team co-design different projects and materials, and so it's again just this very sort of uplifting, sustaining project to be part of at a personal level. So I'm incredibly grateful to just everyone who's volunteered their time and been part of growing and helping us in this mission.
Brilliant. Well, long may the mission continue. In terms of just coming back to yourself here, Sam, for me, you've also given out a real sense of growth and learning along the way. You know, you've evolved through your professional tennis career, but also as a business owner, and you know the journey's switched and changed and turned and all over. But there's obviously a huge amount of growth, and you mentioned there about taking on new ideas and taking risks and learning through them and growing. You know, are there any kind of resources or places that have really supported your growth and development that you could point people to, whether it be books or resources, or you know, how do you develop yourself other than have a go?
Yeah. So I particularly find teachers that I like and that I can kind of challenge and question and kind of build those comfortable relationships. I think that's really important. So my mindfulness teacher, for example, is just incredibly wise, and so I make sure that I have time with him. So I think taking that step of figuring out who can help you and making time to approach them, I think is a big thing. So actually writing to people like to be asked questions, generally, especially if it's about what they're passionate about and good at and have some, you know, their careers built on it. So that was something I did a lot of growing up, was just like writing to strangers and famous people. And so I think that's one thing. Recently I've been getting into I find it really hard to sleep. I put on these debates, philosophical debates, like Jordan Peterson versus Sam Harris is a great one. They did like a 4-part series, and really nice to listen to people with different views who are not just saying it because they want to be different, but who are actually trying to sort of be thoughtful and then hear that. So I like listening to arguments. TED Talks, of course. There's a fantastic book which you know all about, The Long Win, which has been pretty fundamental to my thinking and to lots of people that Dr. Kath Bishop, the author, knows their thinking. It's a really powerful book that I recommend. So I think just trying to explore and not get too attached to ideas. Probably the thing that speaks to your previous question around kind of being fluid. I think it's, you know, we kind of build up these ideas of who are to be listened to or who's not to be listened to just based on stuff that is sort of a bit of an illusion, really. So I think being very, very open and realizing that you can learn in lots of different ways through conversations with the person that you see on the street, and that would be my take.
Learning from everywhere, you know, just picking up the opportunities, isn't it, by the sounds of it, and being open to them. It's kind of what I'm hearing. There's so many different avenues and opportunities there, which, you know, you can grab them, can't you? Listening to podcasts, listening to people speak. You know, somebody once in a previous podcast talked about, actually they went in to get their car tire changed and they picked up to one of the magazines there, and they learned loads from just reading one of the magazines in the most unlikely place, you know, at the most unlikely time. But it was just being open to it, you know.
I find it quite difficult to read. I get so many ideas so quickly that it's not a very relaxing pursuit for me. So and actually listening to podcasts on the topic that I'm really passionate about, I actually find that quite difficult. So what I tried to do recently, I've tried to listen to completely sort of random things and see what I can learn from those. So I listened to one about the history of radiators in New York, and it was great actually, and actually had a really kind of relaxing effect because you know, my mind was, like the person you referenced earlier, my mind was occupied on something that was a little bit different, and then you can that really helps you kind of bring creativity to what you do. Anyway, and that was actually something that we encourage with kids in sport. You know, take the sort of driven, determined, tenacious bit of you when you play football, and try to integrate that into when you're playing tennis, or take the poise when you're doing your ballet class and try to incorporate that. So I think that's the approach that works can work really well for athletes as well as people in business.
It's lovely, and as you're talking, I recall picking up something just yesterday around the idea of solitude and the importance of actually finding space to allow your mind to be quiet, especially in this given age where there is so much stuff, isn't there? Information overload, and if we don't find time to just quieten the mind, and I guess this plays quite a lot to your kind of the mindfulness principles, but it's about actually also just allowing yourself to make sense of things, and solitude's not about locking yourself away from the world, but just allowing yourself to just consolidate and reflect and so on, which I think is getting a real good balance.
Yeah, absolutely. I do a workshop to athletes on equanimity. So the ability to be sort of composed in the midst of difficulty. And we talk about how that equanimity sometimes sort of masquerades as indifference. Yeah. So as if you're detached, but actually it's this being completely with what's happening in a really skillful way. So yeah, I think the being able to be still, being able to be calm are things that are pretty tough in this age that we're in of scrolling through social media feeds and having the inbox going off the wall. And yeah, so I think and that's why actually our mindfulness classes are quite quick in the effects, I think. So kids, athletes feel the work very quickly, within 30 seconds it's like, oh wow, sort of washing over them, like, okay, so there's this that I could access anytime. Nice. Yeah, so it's a very important thing, especially when we're so saturated with advice as well about, for example, mental well-being. You scroll through a social media feed, maybe it's just because of what we follow, but it's kind of everywhere. And it's all very well sort of reading about things and looking at infographics, but the practice of slowing down and being and having a gentle and slower conversation, and they're all very valuable.
Wow. Well, that leads me on to you, I guess, in some ways, of a sense of, we've talked about there lots of principles about preparing ourselves to be, do I dare say, a good version of ourselves or the best we can be, and that sort of idea. So, Sam, how do you prepare yourself mentally and physically? I know you've talked a lot about the mindfulness programs that you run, but what do you do?
Yeah, so I have become better at this. I get more sleep now, not just the night before, but sort of 2, 3, 4 days leading up to something. I need a lot of my own time, which I didn't realize just quite how much me time I needed to really perform well. And sometimes that's, when you're an athlete growing up, that can be quite difficult to find. You've got to get in the car and you've got to then have a meal with people, whatever. So being a little bit more, I guess I've become more aware of that. I tend to do something pretty physical, like just before whatever the thing I need to do is, the performance. So whether it's walking or running, or whether it's even just a 5-second pretend shout in the mirror with a fist pump and that little bit of sort of surge. So yeah, I guess a lot of those things from being a tennis player probably have carried through into I get really nervous, so mindfulness has been helpful for that. Again, it's stuff that I sort of wish that I'd been exposed to earlier on, which is all part of this project, really.
Yeah. Well, you're using it to the benefit now, though, aren't you, by sharing it and practicing it, I guess. And I do like the connection you make there between, you're now practicing these same principles as a business leader here, aren't you?
Yeah, and being upbeat, the sort of mix of having a growth mindset, so looking for the opportunities in things, but at the same time being quite acceptance based, using a mindfulness sort of lens to really be forgiving and to realize that there are chances to begin again, and that's not just giving yourself a free pass. I think that can be quite a hard concept for people. So all of these influences and different sort of practices that we're exploring through the True Athlete project are definitely helping me and my own kind of ability to turn up each day and hopefully be a positive force for people around me.
Brilliant stuff. Sam, you also mentioned earlier on in our conversation, which is, leading me to my kind of last couple of questions here, but is about the impact your father played in the early part of your career. I sometimes think this is a bit of an unfair question because, we go on a journey, lots of people impact on us, for sure. But are there any standout people or situations which you've gone, wow, that's been really pivotal in who I am today and made a massive difference in helping me take one or another direction?
It's felt like a very, very gradual, organic process of reflection, to be honest, as sort of just being conscious, just kind of turning up and trying my best and trying to be creative and trying to be open-minded. I think it's really hard to pinpoint moments. The work I did with the sort of at-risk Hispanic first and second generation immigrant kids was quite a pivotal little phase in my life, I think, and a really special. That was probably the first time where I was maybe enjoyed being part of a team. Actually, not really thought about it like that, but that was, I guess that was my first sort of selfless sporting. It wasn't about me competing. It was very much about trying to help this team of kids. And it was very much like a sort of cliche Disney movie in terms of our like sort of rags to riches story in what we did in the league. We were sort of complete underdogs and eventually won the championship. And so that was quite a cool memory to be able to have a sort of sweltering Georgian day in the States on this very dodgy pitch and winning on a penalty shootout. And so that was,
you couldn't have made it up, couldn't you?
No, so that was certainly a moment that was inspirational to be able to keep going. I think a lot of it is like just these moments that happen, the conversations with people. And I remember a kid, he was so incredibly physically talented, this just amazing little athlete at the school where I was the head of sport. And we finished, and he had some pretty significant difficulties at home, not to go into them, but I mean, really pretty unbelievable stuff that had happened. And we finished the session, and the rest of his class went in, and he just kind of sat on the step, and the teacher had, his class teacher had led through the rest of the class, and the door closed, and I was just there, and he just sat and was quiet. And I sat next to him, and I asked a couple of questions, and nothing was coming back at all. And eventually I just sort of put my arm around him on his shoulder, and we just sat there, and we just sat, and he kind of put his head into me, and we sat, and eventually he got up and he left. And it was like just this incredibly sort of amazing moment where it was just trying to be there for someone in the way they needed. And that isn't always just fixing stuff, it's just sitting with, being there. So there are moments like that, I think. There was also one, just to share, at a training camp recently, where we were doing it can be quite a difficult thing to give mindfulness to people because it's quite weird. So, for example, we've got these sparring training camps with British Fencing that I go and deliver at, and people have come to fight each other, and it's quite loud, and there's a lot going on, and there's quite a lot of setup time anyway. So when they come to do a mindfulness class, it feels like quite a lot of pressure to do something quite dynamic or interesting, and a lot of the practice is about being patient and slow. And anyway, we were doing this body scan at the end of the day, and I noticed a kid being pretty sort of, like talking and trying to bring a couple of other people in. And then through the weekend, I was noticing the same pattern and trying to kind of be a bit cheeky at the back of the class and bring people. And I was getting sort of more and more frustrated and actually not handling it very mindfully. I mean, in the moment, it was okay, but I was sort of asking other coaches, like, what's going on? Like, this is pretty frustrating. And so I was then sitting in the sort of cafe area and saw this kid walking toward me, and I thought, well, usually if you just build a little bit of a relationship, that's the best thing to do. And so I just said, he came to get his water bottle or something on the table, and I just said, hey, how you doing? And suddenly like opened up about how the practices have changed his life, how the reason he comes to camps is to do these practices, and he's been trying, and he had questions about how to integrate it, and all this really kind of genuine stuff about difficulties he'd faced. And it was just this amazingly, like, sort of just a wake-up moment for me in terms of not judging a book by its cover, I guess.
Yes.
And being able to, embody mindfulness through difficulty, because you don't know what someone is necessarily thinking or feeling. And so I think it's those type of surprises that come up that are
and being open to them, though, isn't it, as well, and hearing them and seeing them when they come, because one of the things that came to me as you were talking there is, sometimes it's not always what you say, it might be what you do, by just putting your arm around it. Sometimes that you might never know, or you might not know until 6 months later or a year later, isn't it? It's, I guess, still bringing the best of you to that, which is fabulous. And how that's, and I guess conversely, how that's probably happened to you, isn't it? Because you've had an impact on those people's lives. Those will have happened to us along the journey as well, won't they? Those small moments.
Absolutely.
And Sam, what about the journey you've been on? And you've clearly reflected on it and are very, work hard in being conscious in your journey. Would you give any advice now to a younger version of yourself? Looking back, what 2 or 3 little tips, if any, would you maybe say to yourself if you were back at that sort of early teenage years, for instance?
Probably to be less annoyed with the people who weren't trying to change things. I think in some ways the anger was good. Like, I was pretty frustrated by just society generally. Yeah. I think that was quite motivating. But I think learning that people are coming from a good place generally. Yeah. And if they're not coming from a good place, that's where you need extra sympathy and extra care and extra thought, as opposed to less sympathy and care and thought. So that's probably being a little I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to I don't think I have regrets around it, but I think that would probably be the bit that maybe would also ease me through at that time. I think if I'd have thought that people around me, maybe I was having difficulty with, that they were actually coming from a decent place, that probably would have helped me.
Or the bit I hear is, that they're not coming from a bad place. They might have come from a place of not knowing, maybe, or something like that.
Not knowing. I think that's right.
No, really powerful stuff. And then and then our energy might be different back then, but it's hindsight stuff, isn't it? It's just it's lovely though. And my final question would really be, I've been kind of transfixed on your journey here and how we've gone up and down and where we've gone and the kind of work that you're doing. And, you've clearly given a huge part of yourself out to myself and to those listening in. And is there anybody's sports story or journey out there which you would be curious to find out a bit more about, as a future potential guest on the podcast?
So when I was looking at thinking about that earlier, I suddenly thought, and I don't think I don't know how much people would want to listen, but I would certainly want my dad to do one. I was thinking how little I actually know of what you asked earlier around his development into that sort of Zen type of teaching tennis, and so that would be a cool one. So maybe I can take that up personally by asking some more intentional questions next time I see him. But I think some of the mentees on our global mentoring project, our global mentoring program, are very inspirational already at a young age. So I'd like to. Sometimes I'm quite jealous of the mentors for they get these incredible sort of year-long partnerships that build up with these fantastic young people who are already out in the world doing amazing things. So there'd be a good cohort there for you in the future.
Well, do you know what, Sam? Those 2 points are absolutely amazing what you've just said there, because for me, I think the idea of looking and understanding the impact of our childhood and parents and so on is a fascinating one, and I think we can only get greater value from that. So I really love the idea of speaking to your father about that sort of thing. And what I would always love on the podcast at some level is to actually have a father and child kind of idea, so we could have a three-way conversation, so we could have that conversation. I just think that would be an amazing kind of dynamic. So great idea. And also, the idea of the mentor relationship with the athletes is the principle of the podcast as well, because I feel really fortunate about hearing your story and being part of that journey, and I'm looking the job that I do about going out and coaching and mentoring many other people. And I think that's what's driven me, is that I think we've all got such amazing stories that will impact on different people in different ways. So I think the principle of what you've just raised there is fundamentally and underpins what this is all about as well. So thank you for that. And I think we're on the same page, because I think we can all help other people the more we can kind of share those journeys.
Yeah, absolutely. And a specific person as well is Lawrence Halstead, who's the director of that mentoring program. Okay. So has played a fundamental role in growing the True Athlete Project and developing the philosophy. And he has a book coming out this summer, so he would be a wonderful person to get his take on. And also has both his parents were Olympians, so also has a great parent-son sort of sporting
dynamic
to talk about. Yeah,
great stuff. Well, Sam, look, you've mentioned the True Athlete Project, all your work. How might anybody be interested in finding out a bit more? Make sort of contact with you, or drop you a note. Is there any sort of websites or social medias that they could connect with you on?
Yeah, so our website is www.thetrueathleteproject.org. thetrueathleteproject.org. You can write to me, sam@thetrueathleteproject.org. And our Twitter handle is @trueathleteproj. So it'd be great if anyone wanted to reach out and make contact, and we'd really love that. Thanks.
Brilliant.
Thanks for the offer.
Well, it just leaves me to say, a huge thanks once again. I've really been blown away by your thoughtfulness and your honesty and your openness. And, I hope the speed and the pace has been really kind of authentic and true to us, actually, which is important to me, but also, it's come across from you in bucket loads. So really good luck with the project. I've just got a funny feeling we'll be in contact a bit more as we go forward, given the kind of the journeys that the True Athlete Project's on, and if we can help at the sports stories and either through the podcast or some of the other developmental resources that we're providing, then we'd be delighted, because it is all about ultimately trying to make a difference.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everything you do. Yeah, can't wait to work together more.
Thanks, Sam. So there we have it, the story of Sam Parfitt. I guess you could say, from a young tennis player being coached by his father right the way through to being a business founder and CEO of the True Athlete Project. And what an amazing project it is as well. The whole conversation for me was enthralling, quite meditative in its style and approach, which is a real true reflection of the speed and the pace and the qualities that Sam brings into the work that he does. It's really made me reflect on the types of communities that he's worked with, and the impact that's had, stemmed from some of the introduction to the sporting world and the principles that he picked up from his father. And I really love the idea that he's still got so much to further explore and understand from the impact his father had on him. But taking that right the way through to a real purposeful, meaningful approach to the work that he does, and recognizing the power of sport as a vehicle for change, really, and not just a vehicle for change, but really making communities and individuals' lives so much better. So plenty of messages going through there, and on a real specific note around the work that Sam did, recognizing the highs and the lows of his career, and the self-awareness that he picked up from that, and how that's really informed both the work that he does, but also how he does it and the journey that he's gone on. And I really have a huge sense of curiosity in terms of, actually, this is only the start of the True Athlete Project and the work that Sam's doing, both in the UK, in America, but probably even more so around the world. So as usual, this would lead me on to posing a couple of questions, or in this case, 3 questions. Sam talked quite a lot about mindfulness, and the question I'd like to pose to you is, what do you need to do to slow yourself down and to be a bit more mindful about yourself in terms of how you carry yourself, what you do, in order to perform at a level that you would hope and actually add further value? So really considering about how we could bring mindfulness and mindfulness practices and approaches into the work that you do and how you live your life. The second question, how can you be more forgiving of yourself? And Sam mentioned that about being quite a difficult concept, but being forgiving of yourself without giving yourself a free pass and not making any excuses, especially in things that may not have worked out or currently do not work for you. So the concept of really getting off your own back and allowing you to move forward, but also taking a real purposeful and realistic view of the world. And the third one, which is a bit of a bonus question, would be about how much do you know about your mother or your father's story and how they impact on you? And that again resonates back to that question Sam said about he would really like to further explore the Zen proverbs and so on that his father brought in, and understanding his father's story, because that would actually create a greater awareness of the work that he does. Now, again, I raise big questions because I'm really conscious and keen for the podcasts to be both entertaining, but also really purposeful in the sense of actually asking yourself a question to help you develop. They might ask questions you're not sure of what the answer is, or they might post things for you to go away and consider. But if we consider these and then take this insight from the podcast into action, then we're likely to reap those rewards. So I do hope you consider the questions, whether you jot them down, consider them on a walk, record them into a phone or wherever you do your reflections. But I really encourage you to take stock and think about how these might be able to further impact on you. And as always, please, the feedback we get is phenomenal. It really keeps me driving forward. And I don't know if you've noticed on the social media platforms over the last few days or so, but this is the anniversary of the Sports Stories podcast, and the feedback and the comments and the difference this has made to many people, and the positive strokes that have been fed back to me in terms of actually what the podcast is doing, and the diversity and the audience and how the guests are coming forward and opening up has just been amazing. So please keep your comments, your feedback, and any ideas that you have going forward. Please keep them coming. The place you can do so is again on the usual social media platforms, Twitter, LinkedIn, on Facebook, but also look on the website, which is www.sportstories247.com. It's a new website, so please go there. There's loads of great resources will become available. I'm really proud of the book list that we've got there. So we've got a book club going on. So there's loads of great resources which are being shared by all of the guests, and they cause great inspiration. So there's something there for everybody. And as always, it leaves me just to finish off by thanking Sam for being a great guest on this particular show. This is part of series 5. We're heading on. We've got some great guests coming up, but without the guests and without the insights and the variety and variation that people bring, then the podcast wouldn't be as it is. So thanks, Sam, for today. And also thank you for listening in. As again, without you listening and engaging and offering your feedback and showing the difference this is making to you, it wouldn't be quite the same. So thanks again for taking the time to engage. And lastly, please do look out for the programs that are coming live pretty shortly. I'm launching the Maximize Your Coaching and Leadership Impact program. It hopefully will give great inspiration. It's based off a lot of the feedback we've got through the podcasts, but also looking to truly help you move forward and make a difference in your life. It's an online program, so look out for further details to engage in the launch of the Maximizing Your Coaching and Leadership Impact, which for me is something that can absolutely make a difference to you both at home and at work, and make a real difference to leading a sort of a healthier, happier and more successful life, really. And to support that, also there will be further news coming forward around the coaching and mentoring offer that we will provide. So again, have a look on the website, www.sportstories247.com. And all that leaves me to say is have a great week, enjoy yourself, make a difference where you can, consider the questions, but also give yourself some time to invest in yourself. And I look forward to you joining me, as I say, Dave Levine, next week for another great guest. So take care, and I'll see you again soon.